Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Okay, welcome to Hoeglaw's Postmortem discussion of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. If you've been following the channel, you know I have a deep love for the series. I had my issues with The Last Jedi. It was those issues that actually, in part, gave birth to this YouTube channel, and we will certainly be talking about births and genealogy and relations and whatnot in respect of this movie. If you're not familiar with our postmortems, you should be aware this is going to be spoiler-filled. I just saw the movie. We're going to talk about essentially my early thoughts. Postmortems are reflective of the kind of conversations I used to have with my family after seeing those movies, and the kind of conversations that I make my wife and now family put up with on a regular basis. And on that note, for the very first time on the Hoeglaw YouTube channel, we have a special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself, or would you like a super introduction, honey?
I want like fanfare and some music, like a big intro.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. The only woman who was silly enough to marry me a few years back. We're not going to put a number on that.
Please don't.
No, definitely not. Sharon Hoeg, the law behind the Hoeg Law, I think, really, the law behind the household. We wouldn't be able to get anything done without her. She helped me put up this microphone system and put up with my YouTube channel now for more than a year. So thank you very much for that, hon.
You're welcome.
And was my date at tonight's viewing of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Now, before we get into just kind of overview thoughts, I want to get your thoughts before we were going, before I even bought these tickets, because like me, Last Jedi was not your favorite Star Wars film.
No.
And so we're going into the few weeks before this movie launches. I buy tickets. What did you feel when I bought them? What did you feel like this afternoon before we went to see the movie?
I did not care.
Yeah, you know, we've been Star Wars fans for a long time. My wife is the kind of woman who had a Padme Amidala dress that she had put together and had her hair done for Star Wars Celebration. And we were very excited. Star Wars was one of those things that we bonded over in our early dates. And we arrived in the year 2019, and folks, she didn't care. And this is the same woman that actually had an Avengers sweatshirt made up for Endgame because she was so excited about that film. Now, you watched it. We get to the end. I've been telling you all the business and law stuff from Star Wars about the various machinations of Disney and how the tracking is looking, and the reviews came out yesterday. We get to the end. First of all, what did you do when the credits rolled?
I actually clapped.
Yes.
And I am as surprised as you are, because not only did I not really care about this movie or really feel anything towards any of these characters except BB-8, because I love him. But I just, like, the hype wasn't there. And if you're going to compare it to how I felt, like, the day of and the day before and the week leading up to Endgame, like, that was crazy. And it just kind of fell sort of flat for me heading into this movie. But I got to the end, and, you know, I was hoping I could say I didn't hate it. But actually, I kind of liked it.
And on the car ride home, you actually said, I would watch that again.
I would watch that again.
She also did add, I'm not sure I would pay for it again, so you can take that under advisement. But she actually said to me, I would watch that again. She clapped, and she's nudging me throughout the film, basically saying, stop thinking about it. Stop thinking about it. This is fun. This is good. And, you know, if you're finding me on my YouTube channel and you look at the rest of the stuff I do, not thinking about something from an analytical perspective is pretty difficult for me. So my wife liked it. She's not going to go so far as to say, love, we're going to dive into a few things that she liked specifically. I don't quite arrive there. But I will say I clear the threshold of I didn't hate it, which is the threshold that she set out going into the movie. I find it deeply problematic as the final movie in a trilogy. And really not necessarily JJ's fault, although you can blame him for The Force Awakens, certainly. There is a certain hollowness to the emotional empathy you should have with characters at the end of a 3-movie arc. And so while I think The Rise of Skywalker does a lot of good things or has a lot of good ideas that maybe aren't executed so well, it ultimately, for me, winds up feeling hollow. So you have these moments that are big and epic and sweeping, and if you don't, at the end of the day, really care about the underlying characters that much, I have trouble getting swept along. So I look at it and I say, yeah, it's more like a Star Trek Beyond or something that's like a fantasy or sci-fi movie that I enjoyed. Had some pretty pictures. It actually had some gorgeous pictures, and we can talk about that. But
hey, that's a really positive thing I haven't heard you say yet about the movie.
yes, well, the car ride home was very much Sharon telling me to be more positive and what did I like about the movie, and we're going to talk about that kind of stuff. And I know you don't necessarily want to be on the entire postmortem, so we'll try to hit you first so that you can go do other stuff. But yeah, I think it had some gorgeous visuals. It had some very good acting. It probably has the best acting of any of the Star Wars trilogies. The Disney trilogy just in general was just really well cast. And one of the things I say about J.J. Abrams all the time is I think he's the best casting director in Hollywood. I think he cast Star Wars fantastically well. I think he cast Star Trek fantastically well. And The Last Jedi was one of those areas where those actors weren't really used to their fullest, and I think they got to stretch their legs a little bit more in this movie. So I have a complicated relationship with Star Wars anyway. This film I have an even more complicated relationship with. So with that all said, as kind of the high-level summary of how we feel about this movie, what was one thing you really, really enjoyed, hon?
Are you thinking about something specific?
No, I'm not.
I mean, because I have a couple things. First of all, I really like the music.
Yeah.
A lot.
John Williams is an up-and-comer.
I mean, obviously, who doesn't love him? But I really felt like it came through in this movie. I don't remember much of it from The Last Jedi, and I don't really reflect a lot on it in The Force Awakens, but in this movie, I feel like it really did kind of hit me at certain moments, like, oh, that's a really nice piece of music that's playing here. I'm really enjoying how the music is adding to this moment. So I like that a lot.
And Star Wars has always been space opera, not just in name, but John Williams added so much just at the start of the thing with all the music that he added. One of the areas where I haven't been thrilled with the sequel trilogy is you didn't get Duel of the Fates, you didn't get Across the Stars, you didn't get Battle of the Heroes. And if I had a complaint about this one, which is supposedly the end of the Star Wars saga or whatever Disney's marketing it as, I think he did a great job sampling. He did a great job sampling with Leia's theme. He used the Force theme. And he used, I think, the three best themes from The Force Awakens, which was Rey's theme, which continues to be gorgeous and maybe one of the best pieces he's ever done for Star Wars. And he used March of the Resistance to really represent Poe primarily, but Poe and Finn together. And then he also used the Jedi Steps as kind of the new Force theme to represent Luke, to represent legacy. And I think he did a great job with it. But for the most part, they are remixes. And so if you go into this movie and you're expecting something like Across the Stars or something to really be operatic and jump out, I think it's great music. It is above most music that you'll hear in blockbuster movies. But it is mostly a John Williams greatest hits, well deployed, and still very, very beautiful. And as you could tell from my wife's answer, very useful to the storytelling. But it doesn't have anything new to grab onto, at least for me.
I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it.
See, I get this a lot. You just spoke for 2 minutes, Rick, and then it's fine. It's fine.
Okay, so something else I really, really enjoyed was the trio, Rey and Poe and Finn, and this adventure. I don't know how much. I don't want to say too much. I don't want to give too much away.
We're going to talk about the whole plot.
Okay, well, they go on an adventure together, and I really love them together. Everything where the three of them are together, I think, is like gold.
Yeah.
They're so fun to watch. I actually feel like for the first time I'm kind of invested in them, and I had a thought.
Yeah.
Like maybe having all of these characters we love from the original trilogy, reappear in The Force Awakens, and we see them again, that they almost kind of get in the way of being able to fall in love with these new characters.
They do.
Because I really enjoyed them in this movie, but they also, I feel like, weren't, I don't want to use the word burdened, but I feel like they're kind of held back a little bit by, oh yeah, we love Han Solo, look, there he is, yeah! And instead we can say, oh look, Poe and Finn and Rey are off on this adventure and what is going to happen to them, we can be really invested in them without being distracted by all this other admittedly cool stuff that we love about Star Wars. And here we get to fall in love with this trio. So I really love that. Everything with them on that like adventure to me was compelling and interesting, and they went to some cool places.
They did.
I really liked a lot of the sets that they were on, some of these planets that they went to.
By far the best planets of the Disney trilogy.
For sure.
Because they actually put fantasy elements in. I mean, Force Awakens essentially had a desert-looking planet and a forest-looking planet and didn't have these kind of highfalutin ideas. And Rise of Skywalker essentially says, forget being grounded. Here's a cartoon Sith planet. And it looks super cool because it has what amounts to Lord of the Rings statues.
Yeah.
And mad scientist gear everywhere.
It was awesome.
So they went for it in a way that it almost feels to me like if this were the first movie in the Disney trilogy, I would feel better about the next two. And the fact that this is the end, it almost feels like you got closer to where you should have been, and you're not trying to copy nearly as much, although we could certainly talk about how much it copies from Return of the Jedi. That you're not trying to copy things as much. You've got some new ideas, and it does present those kind of concepts. Even though I run the risk now of being the negative guy on this video, I do want to say, in terms of the three of them, I think they try very hard, but it's the same issue I have from before, which is that these three characters, which you can kind of come to be friends with in shorthand in the original trilogy by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, these guys didn't know each other. And so they have to try to establish this bickering type friend sitcom relationship on the fly.
That they have a long-term relationship we just haven't seen.
Right, and you get a lot of that with Finn and Poe because they have a number of kind of snipey, sarcastic, but we're bros type conversations. I absolutely adore General. I think that was very, very cute. But it's one of those things where I'm evaluating this movie, and I think that JJ understands what Star Wars is or should be better than The Last Jedi did. And this isn't about talking about Rian Johnson or whatever. There are other videos on my channel that you can find that I do that in. But that he understands what it should be. My primary problem with JJ is that mostly it's mimicry, so it winds up feeling a little hollow. And I don't think this is any different. So he's got some good ideas. He's got some concepts about what heroism should be, a discussion of legacy, and they're all very lightly touched on. And whether or not that's because essentially he had 2 hours and 15 minutes to do the job of 6 hours, I don't know. But certainly when that scroll comes up to start this movie, it is crazy. The first lines are like, what is even happening? And it feels immediately detached from what came before. It's not a piece with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, except for some characters.
No, it's its own kind of entity. And if I were to sum up my thoughts, it's fun. Don't think about it too much.
It's fun and don't think about it too much.
It's fun and don't think about it too much. But wait, I have one more thing I wanted to say.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is I laughed.
You laughed.
There were parts that I really laughed at. So it was fun, and I did enjoy that. I also really liked, there was, and I don't want to get into all the political dynamics of the Rey character, okay? But I also really like that we see this really nice, kind piece of her. She's nice. There's a moment where she's nice to a child in this movie. She's kind to other people around her. She's kind to animals. We see this, we get to see kind of some different sides of her that I really liked.
Would you say she's a Disney princess? You just said kind to animals.
I'm not gonna say that. No.
Does she take a skiff to the horizon? I'm just curious if
did the sea call to her? Is that what you're asking me, Rick?
Did the sea call to her? And is she in fact Moana?
She may be Moana.
Okay.
That
would make Luke Maui, which is its own kind of movie. No, I think that's totally fair. I will say this. Daisy Ridley, who I don't think either gelled with the material or got good direction in Last Jedi. She has a number of lines that don't work for me in that movie. I really loved her in Force Awakens. She is triple the actress that even she was in The Force Awakens. She absolutely killed it in this movie. And I'm going to be honest with you, with maybe not the best stuff to kill it with. So there are a couple things that she has to say. There are a couple situations that she has to be in, which are very difficult. If you're familiar with the original trilogy, you know Harrison Ford complained about a lot of these things back in the day, about having to get these words out of his mouth. She has to do that a couple of times about compressors and hyperdrive and everything else. And she does a really, really excellent job. She emotes well. She is the centerpiece and star of the film, in my opinion, for the first time. The Force Awakens was her movie as a protagonist, but it's always been an ensemble cast. This has some other things, other people doing things, but it's Rey's show. And that's even more than Ben Solo / Kylo Ren. Now, I don't know what your timing is, hun, so I want to get to a few things before you have to go. We have to talk about Endgame.
Yes, we do. One of the greatest movies ever.
Okay, my wife loves Endgame. We like Endgame in this household. We're going to talk about two things. We already warned about spoilers, but this is heavy, heavy spoilers. This is the end of the third act. How do you feel about the resistance, rebellion, whatever they're going by in this movie, fleet, coming in at the darkest hour over a montage through a radio signal that almost says on your left, Cap?
It's not okay, man.
It's not okay. Yeah, well...
It's not okay. Okay, wait. My actual critical analysis of that moment is... It works in Endgame because you're so invested. There is this moment of just complete hopelessness. And, you're going to keep going, but you've got nothing left. And, all the pieces for that are there in Rise of Skywalker. But, I just don't get all the way to that emotional resonance that I feel when I watch Endgame. Whether that's because I've been invested for a decade in those movies, or because there's just more to it, or I care more about those characters. I don't know. I can't pinpoint it. That's what Rick Hoeg is for. But I feel like all the pieces are there. It just doesn't get me all the way there.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I'm having so much trouble kind of isolating the discussion in this movie, is because I think it does a lot of goofy stuff like Endgame does, but I wound up feeling in the moment very differently about those things. And to some extent, it's on the nose, and JJ has or else they came up with it separately, which maybe they did.
It could happen, sure.
But they certainly then edited it to look and feel like Endgame. And it wasn't the only moment in this movie. As a matter of fact, the primary end of the battle, Rey wins, the light wins, finishes with what I'm sure will be an iconic line for reasons that Disney would prefer it wasn't. I'm sure this will be on memes of all sorts and will be people's Twitter handles in a week or so. But Palpatine turns to Rey and says, "I am all Sith." And then a beat for her weakened and battle-weary state, she says, "And I am all Jedi," in the exact same kind of tempo and zoom in and everything else as "I am Iron Man." What do you think about that, hun? It's just a face. This is a microphone. They can't see you.
I don't even know what to say about that. Okay, so, backstory, because Iron Man is my favorite of all the Marvel superheroes. We all know how I feel about Iron Man in this house. Iron Man is the epitome of everything, and I feel like to kind of take that moment and rip it out and slap some Star Wars on it and put it at the end of this movie is just, it just feels wrong.
But it didn't take away from the fact you clapped at the end of the movie. I mean, that's the climax, but it almost didn't matter.
No, I mean, I can pull that out and say, man, that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but no, still watch it again.
Still watch it again. Okay, so yeah, those are the Endgame kind of beats. I don't know if you caught any more. I don't watch it necessarily as much as you do. But yeah, so like the rest of the movie, it takes homages all over the place. You've talked about the adventure that the team goes on. It's about the first 2/3 of the movie or so, and I think it could best be described as a treasure hunt. It's almost Indiana Jones inspired, where they've got various maps and they go to various places. You said you liked it. You said it was fun. Did you have any issues with how it developed?
Sure. Because we talked about this in the car, which is...
Right, but they weren't in that car ride with us.
I understand that.
Thank God. That would be frightening.
There were some moments where we're off on this adventure and it's like, I don't know if you just... If the script got written into a corner or... we don't want to belabor this point. So, it's almost like, look, here's the clue. It was actually in my pocket the whole time. I found it. So there's just some moments where, like, the solution is almost trite. Like, it's just a throwaway, we solved this problem. Let's move on to the next thing. And it feels really, it's just it's actually kind of jarring when you're watching it.
Yeah.
Like, there really should have been more to how this was solved. This could have been more interesting.
Yeah, if you're going to have a treasure hunt, part of the fun is seeing the logical beats go from place to place. And there's a message from Palpatine off screen that leads to a book, that leads to a planet, that leads to a sand trap, that leads to a knife, that leads to a language, that leads to the knife again, which is then used as a kind of sextant Goonies coin thing on the shoreline, that leads to the Wayfinder, which, by the way, wound up being in the room next to the Emperor's throne. If you were just looking for one of these things, strikes me that that's where you'd probably check for it. But, hey, that's not up to me. And so you've got this long chain of events, which allows you to globetrot, which I think we both liked.
Yeah.
I think in the Disney trilogy, one of the issues we've had is you're not necessarily star jumping, you're not going to cool places, and I think J.J. Abrams was trying to fix that a little bit. He did the hyperspace skipping or whatever he wound up calling that, where it just wound up going to random places, which was odd, but I think designed to be like, hey, look at all the fun stuff in Star Wars.
The universe is big.
The universe is big.
This was your big complaint. You just kept walking around the house yelling, "Scope!" because you wanted the universe to be big, like we remember seeing it in the other 6 movies from the past. It's very vast. And I think that's part of what the globetrotting solves, is that we do feel like we have traversed part of the universe to solve this puzzle.
When you describe me just walking around the house shouting things, they're going to believe you. And they're going to think I'm deranged.
Well, maybe when your Star Wars-ness takes over, you just...
I'm just going to edit this all out. I'm going to edit it all out. Yeah, no, I actually was... The last time I was really talking up the scope of a movie was Rogue One. That had all those big shots of the Death Star and things of that nature. So the adventure you turn your brain off, and it's okay, even though maybe it's a little bit choppy because it's going a little fast. It's weird that the next point on the map is written on the knife, which is also the compass to find when you line it up with the Death Star ruins. And it's just all very convenient. And as you pointed out, if they don't fall in the sand pit, they don't actually find the first piece of the treasure map. And then when it all comes out that basically Palpatine wants her to find him, it gets a little bit more dicey because presumably they want to start this treasure hunt. I feel like this when we're doing, Easter egg treasure hunts or something along the lines. You want to make sure they don't miss the clue. And I think Palpatine read the script in advance and knew that they would find these specific clues and they'd fall into a worm pit and things like that. And that's the issue I have with it from a logical perspective. But when we talked about how we felt about this movie overall, I like it as a concept for Star Wars. I just would like it tighter. And that's how I feel about a lot of this movie. It's like, okay, you have the treasure hunt. It leads to a weird Sith cult thing. You have a big space battle. And that's about what I want out of my Star Wars. But the execution lacked some...
No, there's a lot to like. And it is fun, and there's a lot of good feelings in it for me. R2's in it and BB-8's in it. I like my cute characters.
And a random new droid. How did you feel about him?
I liked him a lot.
Okay.
He's very cute. So
he felt very much like the merchandising add-on.
No. He's BB-8's new friend. The droids get a buddy.
Sure, not merchandising at all.
No, the droids get a buddy. I love him. I think it's very cute. So there is a lot to like, but there's my conclusion is true. Don't think about it too hard. There's a lot of holes. There's a lot of stuff that does not quite make sense, but there's, I think, a good movie in there for sure.
Okay. Well, so here's my warning. Here's your exit ramp for this. I'm about to launch into a Reylo discussion.
I'm out.
I don't know whether you'd like to participate that or not. Maybe just a one sentence thoughts on the Reylo situation. And then you guys are going to get a much longer kind of didactic from me.
My thoughts on the Reylo situation are that it is unnecessary to the conclusion of the film. It's just unnecessary. It's superfluous. Whether some of those moments are there or not, and I'll leave you to reveal what they are, whether those moments are there or not has nothing to do with the significance of anything. And so to me, kind of feels like, oh, we thought some people might like this or that, so we'll put it in here, but it doesn't resonate with me.
But ultimately, when you say it's superfluous, would you say it is denigrating of the entirety of the core of philosophical and moral beliefs in America and around the world?
I'm going to let you handle that part of the conversation.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to say as a sign-off before it's just you guys all having to listen to me?
I think that people should listen to you. You have some very valid thoughts, but I also think that it's fun enough that you can go and make your own conclusion about the movie for yourself.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on for the first time. You think you'll ever do this again?
I don't know, maybe.
All right, you didn't hate it. That's what we go for here. That's what the movies aim at. That's what the husband aims at. Don't hate it. And so now you all have to listen to me, who did manage to write 6, 7, 8,000 words on The Last Jedi. The good news is I don't have as much to complain about here. I do think I give a little bit of a pass to JJ in what he was left from The Last Jedi. And that's not really speaking just only about what I think about The Last Jedi. It's also about what The Last Jedi narratively left him at the end of that movie, which I talked about with folks on Twitter a little bit. You can follow me at Hoeg Law if you want to have those conversations. Undoubtedly, I will be talking to folks about Star Wars this weekend and probably beyond. But one of the things I said was, like it or hate it, The Last Jedi felt like a finale. And you hear that in the interviews that some of the actors had, some JJ had, some of the people that actually work on the production of the movies. And it felt like a finale. And in order to start this new movie up, you basically had to create a trilogy of backstory in the first 30 minutes or so. And ultimately what that winds up feeling like is it's very jarring. It's very choppy. It's a lot of fast stuff. They try to cover some of it in the opening crawl, but it's so jarring. I actually almost did a spit take when I read the first line because I just wasn't expecting it. And I don't want to necessarily spoil that for you so that you can have your own spit take if you haven't seen the language already somewhere on the internet. But it's so ridiculous in nature. I almost wanted it to be voiced by like the voice of an opening of a Clone Wars episode, which is that kind of overly 40s ridiculous style. So maybe it'll grow on me. In the moment, it was like, oh my gosh, what am I sitting down to watch? And as my lovely wife pointed out, it launches in from there to some Kylo scenes. One of the things you didn't hear her talk about a lot was Kylo. She really didn't like Kylo's plotline in this movie. She didn't like what we should probably call Kylo and Ben Solo's plotline in this movie. And ultimately, she didn't like it because she didn't like their interaction. She preferred hanging out with the friends and them trying to figure out what was going on. And we'll talk about Kylo a little bit. I have to say I agree with her. Most of the problems that I have with the movie stem from that relationship that Kylo has with Rey, stem from the way that JJ kind of expands upon some of the more ridiculous Force powers that appear in The Last Jedi. Most prominently, kind of Force Skyping can now have direct physical transmittal, where that was kind of implied in Last Jedi, where some of the rain was transferring. Now that's much more direct and actually used as one of the solutions at the end of the film. But it just launches into everything, and then it launches into the plot line of what's going to be the entire 2 hours of the movie, essentially out of nothing. It's one of the reasons that this doesn't feel like a part of the trilogy. It feels much more like maybe a good one. Maybe you'll like it. I can't speak to that necessarily because I think you have an equal chance of liking it and disliking it depending on exactly how much you're willing to turn your brain off for some of this stuff. But that maybe you'll like it, but it feels independent of what came before. And that's this entire Palpatine plotline, which is the entire driver behind everything that happens. And so within the first, I'd have to guess, but 15 minutes maybe, You've now learned that Palpatine sent out a message across the galaxy, warned everybody of his existence, apparently left what they're calling a wayfinder for Kylo to find, told Kylo to go bring Rey back to him, or actually he told her to kill him, or told him to kill her. And we can talk about exactly what's happening there, whether he's plotting, because certainly at the end of the movie, the apparent intent of that plan was for Rey to come to him. But that after that, the rest of the resistance, rebellion, whatever they're being called now, finds out about it, learns from their spy on the inside of the First Order that the First Order has been ordered to help the fleet come out of hiding in what is now called the Final Order, and they have a certain amount of hours to go and find this planet, which they know is called Exegol, and defeat the Final Order before the end of the movie and before the credits roll. And that's the entirety of the thing. And so then Rey realizes that Luke was looking for this planet, apparently. And one of the through lines of this movie, I'm not going to lie, is that JJ works time and time and time again to tell people that are watching this that The Last Jedi, you don't have to worry about The Last Jedi. And one of those is, okay, Luke was a failure. People didn't like Luke. And we're going to say that Luke was looking for this planet, presumably before he exiled himself, but that Luke was looking for this planet, and it is the first clue on the roadmap to finding Emperor Palpatine. And so he has this little bit of information that leads him to a desert planet, which was admittedly pretty cool. One of the other complaints about the Disney trilogy was that there aren't enough aliens, that Star Wars was very human, very grounded, and they weren't putting enough aliens in. They have so many aliens in this movie that it can only be that JJ was directly trying to respond to that complaint. And you see that in the very first planet that they arrive on. Then they find out from Lando, who helps save them from the First Order that attack them on this planet, that in fact there was a Jedi killer that they should go and find his ship, because that was where he and Luke thought the next piece of the puzzle might be. They go, they find themselves in a kind of desert area that after they're hunting down by stormtroopers or jet troopers or whatever they might be, and they fall through this kind of Princess Bride sinking muck into this snake hole where they find a couple things. One, they find the equivalent of a land speeder BMW with what we are told is a Sith insignia in its hood ornament. So it very much reminds you now, if you're following along with the treasure hunt, and now with what amounts to the Nazi car that they find, that we are playing in an Indiana Jones environment. And by the time you get to the end of the movie, where something we have to talk about in the Disney trilogy is what it does to the original trilogy and to the prequel trilogy. Because the unfortunate part about all of this is that it doesn't exist in a vacuum. We can talk about whether we like this movie if it was the first movie we ever saw in our lives, and I think there are things to like about it. But as the 9th episode of Star Wars, it has to be said that a lot of the prequel trilogy and a lot of the original trilogy is focused on Anakin and his familial belief system, and whether or not you can resurrect someone directly impacts that. So when Anakin is holding his mother's body and she's not quite dead in the desert, if he had that power, he could have healed her. When he's concerned about Padme, the ultimate reason for his fall and the reason that he starts an empire in the first place is because Palpatine tells him they can cheat death together. And when you get to the end of this movie, not only has Palpatine been revived for reasons that are not terribly understandable to me, other than the fact that he's a useful kind of figure in the Star Wars universe, you get to the end of this movie and Ben Solo, formerly Kylo Ren, revives Rey from all appearances from death. And he transfers entirely his life force to her in order to do it. And it's not as dirty as it sounds, although they do have a very passionate kiss afterwards. But he revives her from death. He does exactly what Anakin couldn't to save Padme. And it doesn't work with what Star Wars lore was. Now, one of the conversations Yoda has with Anakin is, we shouldn't mourn the dead. They are joining the Force. That is the natural way of things, and the light side is supposed to be about natural things. And Anakin's fall is premised on a line that they actually reuse in this movie, so I know they watched it, about how the Sith use unnatural means to prolong their lives, to potentially come back from the dead, that kind of thing. And this particular power, I don't have a problem with healing necessarily, insofar as the Force can manipulate things. Maybe you could manipulate skin cells and things of that nature. but actually restoring someone to life from death, which I believe is what happens at the end of the movie. It isn't 100% clear. Does strike me as completely upsetting the balance of the Force, the balance of the Star Wars mythos and morality system for no really good reason. She doesn't have to be dead. She could be near death. Maybe you can heal her. Maybe we could get around this a little bit. But they don't seem to care about that. And this is what I mean when I talk about JJ understanding things superficially. He understands camera moves, he understands lightsabers, and he understands sand in the Millennium Falcon, and he also understands that Star Wars should be fun, that it's escapist entertainment, and that's what it's designed to do. Even if the heroes lose, like in Empire Strikes Back, they're still fighting Minox, they're still having battles on Bespin, whatever it is, it's not The Last Jedi. And I think JJ fundamentally understands that. What he doesn't understand is the deeper layer. He doesn't understand the philosophy behind what the Force is, how it should work. It's not a superpower. This isn't supposed to be a Marvel movie. And at the end of the day, it is. This is Ant-Man and the Wasp. This is, if you're going to be generous, Infinity War or Endgame. But it's not necessarily what Star Wars was. And to some extent, I mourn that. I think it's fine. Disney is going to make movies. If they make them in this direction, I think that's probably the right direction to take them in, as opposed to The Last Jedi. But it used to be something bigger. You heard that line in the trailer from The Last Jedi, but it used to be that. And I think now it's a franchise, it's a blockbuster. If they don't treat it right from here, it could easily become Transformers or Pirates of the Caribbean. If they get a little bit better at it, it could be kind of an upper echelon kind of Marvel franchise. But at the end of the day, they don't care about that philosophy. They don't care about the deeper level. And I think that's what kept it alive for 40 years. I think those fans that cared about that stuff, that thought about it as a galaxy far, far away and not a movie series, I don't think they're going to get what they want from this. So when reviewers complain about this being fan service and giving the fans exactly what they wanted, I don't think that makes a ton of sense, because the fans would have wanted a serious take, a serious view on the nature of the galaxy far, far away, on the nature of Star Wars. And while you get the superficial fun and action and adventure out of this movie that is, I think, much better a product than something like The Last Jedi, it's not necessarily the product that you would have gotten from a George Lucas, even if you don't necessarily like his directorial choices or his dialogue. He was an idea man. He had some great ideas. You got all that world building in the prequels. Star Wars meant something. And now it no longer does. And that's a shame, but it is a fun movie. My wife's exactly right on that. It has a zippiness. You don't think about it too hard from scene to scene. And it is a lot of fun to sit there and not think about it. But when you dive in, when you're in a postmortem, when you're talking about this movie, I think all these problems kind of come to the fore. And the biggest one, before I leave you, this has been a long enough video as it is Reylo. So if you don't know already, the main thrust of the action here in the middle of the movie is that Kylo Ren, who has physically assaulted and berated and tortured and kidnapped and assaulted again and won't stop calling and is harassing and everything else for essentially 5/6 of the Disney trilogy, decides after he's stabbed and after Carrie Fisher as Leia Organa does something, which we are never told because JJ loves his mystery boxes, after she does that something, he decides to turn back to the light. And he actually has an appearance from Harrison Ford as Han Solo in what we are told is a memory and not a Force ghost situation, where he contemplates turning back to the light, throws his bad lightsaber away, and goes to help Rey on Exegol, where she is fighting Senator Palpatine, and he helps her against the Knights of Ren, which don't have any lines and don't have any faces and don't have any point other than to be something for him to fight against at the end. And it's in this bond that we are told they are a dyad. We are told that they have this special, unique power that ultimately allows Emperor Palpatine to suck it out of them and to restore himself to health. And we are told that that bond allows them to do the things that we are seeing in the movie, like physical transmittal. At the very end, we see Rey transmit a lightsaber to Kylo Ren through their bond and whatever it is and however it works, so that he can fight while she fights, and they can have that kind of joint fighting environment. But he then essentially saves her life after she dies at the end, and for reasons that aren't very clear. Like so much of this, it's just kind of poetry or symbolism or superficial imagery that doesn't necessarily make sense a bunch. The final battle is, like so many kind of J.J. Abrams joints before, essentially a brute force battle. She gives that line, "I am all the Jedi." She crosses 2 lightsabers in front of her, and Emperor Palpatine never stops firing lightning at her and melts his own face off. And much like Spock hitting Khan until dead or beaten in Star Trek Into Darkness, which before this I really think was JJ's least thought of movie. Like, he really just didn't contemplate how it should all work. Unlike that movie, this one is a little bit better, but it's still brute force. And then she drops dead. She's not hit by a rock. She doesn't appear to have lost her life force. She wasn't getting hit by lightning. Her lightsabers were taking those hits. It was just that she dropped dead. And Ben crawls out of the pit, saves her life with the healing power that they quote-unquote established earlier. She also heals him on the Death Star before he makes his turn back to being Ben. And she says Ben, and then they have a passionate, romantic kiss. Now, in all likelihood, I'm going to write an essay on this movie, and I'm going to write a lot about the Reylo situation, Rey and Kylo. And one of the things that I really am offended by, that I really do find abhorrent, is that Disney puts out there this movie that at its core is about a woman that is beaten and harassed and tortured and kidnapped. And in this movie alone has that happen to her throughout the first 2/3. And just decides, because she is a Disney princess, because she is the goddess of mercy descended from on high, to forgive him for reasons that we aren't really well established on, because apparently they have that dyad, and it beats all logic that one might apply to the situation, that she loves him. The kiss seems to be one of romantic love. And as a father of daughters, I look at that and I say, there's not a lot of messages you can take out of a Star Wars movie. You've got light sticks, you've got space wizards, you've got X-Wings, you've got Millennium Falcons, but you can take certain messages out of the actual characterization and how these people interact. And as that father of daughters, I look at that and say, that is a terrible, terrible lesson. That the girl can go and can save the bad boy that's otherwise beating her and making her scream and cry throughout all of her life. She can save him, and when she does, she'll get this kiss, she'll get this reward. And I just find that a terrible, terrible message. And for a company like Disney, that is supposed to be pretty much America's family-friendly movie company, that you can go, you can have these conversations about morality, I am very, very, very hesitant to let my impressionable daughters kind of take in that storyline. To have Rey be any kind of role model where, as my wife said, she is kind, she is strong, she is dealing with issues of family legacy, and we'll talk about that before we finish up this video. But at the end of the day, for whatever reason, and it's not well established in the movies, and I think that's a major fault, she wants to believe in Kylo Ren. She wants to forgive him. She wants to turn him towards the light because her Force dyad told her he would, or because she saw his abs in the Last Jedi scene. It's unclear. And at the end of the day, they get their kiss, and it's a romantic send-off. And Finn, the guy that would do anything for her and tries to save her from everything and gets force pushed away and almost dies, ultimately loses out to a woman that is much more happy about saving the bad boy and giving him that big kiss. And I don't know that the Finn situation should necessarily be brought into all of this, but he seems to want to tell her that he loves her throughout the movie. They actually never really kind of finish that thought in the script. It might be something that was caught on the editing room floor. But at the end of the day, you've got this kind of toxic relationship at the core of the movie. And that is such a big problem for me at a fundamental level, even while I'm enjoying the whiz bangs and the music and the laser beams and all the fun stuff that I think this trilogy should have been doing from the start. The last thing I want to talk to you about, and I think I will do an essay, I might do even a second postmortem, which would be unusual. I don't think we've ever done that before on the channel, is this notion of Rey taking on the Skywalker name. Now, if you are familiar with my thoughts on movies, on things that I like in movies, one of my favorite themes is how to deal with legacy and the burdens of your forefathers or your mother or whatever the plot line might dictate, and what that means to you as an individual and what it is that you have to carry and what you don't. I love Creed. I love Black Panther. I love The Lion King. I love more serious stuff than just the Disney set of movies, I promise. But I love that kind of theming in what's going on. And this lightly touches on it. It's really close to almost having a good discussion on it. There's a scene where Rey and Kylo are in Kylo's chambers or on the planet, depending on which version that you're looking at, because they are also having a lightsaber fight across 2 locations. Again, physical transmittal. I don't love some of these new Force rules, but that seems a little bit too high level in terms of a high level of granularity. So we'll leave that aside for a second. But they have this discussion, and he says, essentially, when she finds out she's Rey Palpatine, we see her use lightning. She's told she's Rey Palpatine. Presumably it's correct, even though the various people that tell her this are liars instead. And then Luke finally winds up confirming it in a later scene that she's a Darksider, Kylo tells her, and it's in our blood, and we have to carry on that legacy. And I love that notion. No, I don't have to carry on that legacy. My parents' actions are not what define me. I love that theme. I always have. It's not really touched on much other than this kind of assertion that, well, she might be the daughter or the granddaughter of the greatest evil the universe has ever known, but she doesn't have to be that herself. And it's just very superficial. It's not something that's covered very much. They try to establish that Luke and Leia have that belief in her. That's why they trained her. But of course, Luke didn't train her. And it kind of puts The Last Jedi in a different light, that we don't necessarily know whether he's so depressed that he's just being a failure on his own, or that he also sees that she's a Palpatine and he's worried about that power. It's just really, really unclear, and it kind of muddles that message. And like so much of the rest of the movie, you get to the end and she says she's Rey Skywalker, and that 100% didn't work for me. Just from the perspective of the Skywalker legacy and the way the movie plays out, she is a Palpatine. In terms of legacy, you keep that name and you reform it. You don't just take the name of someone else and use that heroic name. I don't like it. I don't think calling that The Rise of Skywalker is very justified, even though you had all these various Jedi from all these various movies and TV shows telling her to rise and all these various things that really did feel like that one scene in Captain Marvel where she stands up a number of times. But you get to the end of that movie and it feels entirely unearned. She's burying these lightsabers on Tatooine, where Leia never was, as far as I know, and where Luke was unhappy. She's burying them there because it's a useful bit of iconography for the movie. She calls herself Rey Skywalker because that's a useful bit of iconography for Disney. And at the end of the day, they didn't know what to do with her. You know, they made her a Palpatine essentially out of nowhere. You never saw those kind of hints of darkness throughout the first 2 movies of the trilogy, presumably because it wasn't decided until the 3rd movie of the trilogy. And then that's what you get. So much of this movie could have been better if you just talked amongst yourselves as directors or writers or showrunners or executive producers or whomever in the first bits of this trilogy to set up some of the things that you want to go on. To set up that Palpatine is still around and working on something. To set up that Rey is a Palpatine. But it feels so much like that wasn't the plan, that there were probably 3 different plans, that Ryan definitely thought she didn't have a lineage at all, that his message was that lineage didn't matter, that, yeah, maybe Force sensitivity does matter to some extent, but that your lineage didn't define you. And while you get to that same place, that you have a similar message at the end of this, you are also trying to explain, if you're JJ, why she has all these powers. You're trying to explain why Luke was the way he was. You're trying to explain why people don't use the Holdo maneuver, as they call it, for the hyperspace light speed jump that kills capital ships. You have all these things that are being spent on trying to explain away The Last Jedi, just like The Last Jedi spent all that energy essentially explaining away the plot hooks that were found in The Force Awakens. And it's just a waste. It's a waste of time, and it's patently obvious to anybody that's paying attention that this trilogy wasn't planned out. And that really takes away from its grand sweep. It takes away from its scope. And I think when you hear things like what my wife said about not having that moment of feeling, when you get that scene that's on your left, when you get that scene that's I Am Iron Man, you don't have that connection with these characters because fundamentally, while they're played by the same actors and they bear the same names, they're a different version of the character in every single iteration. And you can't bond, you can't become empathetic, you can't root for fully characters that are different every single time you meet them. And if there's anything that anybody takes away from the grand Disney Star Wars experiment, it should be that. This is no way to run a race. Almost innate kind of gut revulsion to that from me that says, no, that's unearned. I'm not saying you couldn't have gotten there. I don't necessarily mind the premise. but that is unearned. And when you walk off into the distance with your Tatooine dual sons, it every way feels like unearned fan service, iconography, marketing, whatever you want to call it. And that takes away from the fun, the experience of the movie. You tack on then that you've got a Palpatine out of nowhere that's never fully explained. You tack onto that an adventure sequence, which takes up the bulk of the movie, which, if you turn your brain off and you go with it, is great. But otherwise, the steps of that sequence don't make a ton of sense. And what you've got are pretty lights that are fun to watch. And I didn't hate this movie. I really didn't. I thought I might, especially when the crawl started and I saw what the actual thing said. But I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. And at the end of the day, the Disney trilogy, if it stays canon in your head or otherwise, does take something significant away from Star Wars and everything that came before. I hope this was illuminating. I obviously have a lot of thoughts on this. I am sure I will have a lot more. This is just the postmortem from literally coming back from the theater about an hour ago. Please let me know your thoughts when you see the movie in the description or in the comments to this video. I will check them out, and you will probably be hearing from me more on this in the future. Thank you so much for checking it out.